My name is Marcus Thompson. I never thought I'd be writing this down, but I need someone to know what happened to me in the Flathead National Forest last October. Maybe this will serve as a warning to others, or maybe it'll help explain why I can't come back home. I was a 45-year-old hunting enthusiast. After serving in Vietnam and losing my dear wife Sarah to cancer 6 months ago, I thought a solo hunting trip might help clear my head. The nightmares from the war were getting worse, and Sarah's empty side of the bed wasn't helping either. I remember that Tuesday morning like it was yesterday. I was driving my old 1974 Winnebago RV through the winding Montana roads. The weather report had mentioned possible snow, but nothing serious. I'd been on dozens of hunting trips before. This was supposed to be just another one. The first weird thing I noticed was how quiet everything got as I drove deeper into the forest. Usually you'd hear birds, squirrels, something, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my RV's engine and tree branches scraping against the roof. I found a nice clearing about 30 miles from the nearest town. Whitefish. Perfect spot, I thought, close to a stream, good visibility, lots of deer tracks. I parked my RV, set up my small camp chair outside, and started unpacking my gear. I had my trusty hunting rifle, enough food for a week, warm clothes, and Sarah's old silver locket for good luck. The temperature was dropping faster than I expected. By late afternoon, snowflakes were starting to fall. Big ones, the kind that make no sound when they hit the ground. I noticed something else too. The trees around the clearing seemed older than any I'd ever seen. Their trunks were massive, twisted in strange ways, with bark as black as coal. That first evening, as I sat in my RV making dinner on my small stove, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was watching me through the windows. You know that feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? It was like that, but worse. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, just my PTSD acting up. "Get it together, Marcus," I said out loud. "You've been through worse in Nam." But deep down, something felt different about this place. Wrong somehow. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. If I had known what was coming, I would have started my RV and driven away as fast as I could, but I didn't. Instead, I climbed into my sleeping bag, took my usual sleeping pills, and tried to get some rest. That's when I heard the first knock. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The knock came again, 3 slow taps on the RV's side wall. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't like someone knocking on a door. It was more like something using its knuckles on metal. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart pounding. The digital clock on my RV's dashboard showed 2:17 a.m. The only light came from the moon through the windows, making everything look pale blue and strange. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No answer, just the wind. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked through the curtains. The snow was falling harder now, making it hard to see much. But something moved in the darkness, a shadow passing between the trees. It was too tall to be a person, too smooth to be a bear. More knocks started, this time from different spots around the RV. Front, back, sides, like I was surrounded. My hands were shaking as I reached for my rifle. The metal felt cold against my skin. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice. It sounded like Sarah. "Marcus, let me in, honey. I'm cold out here." It was her voice exactly, the same sweet tone she used when she'd come home from work. But Sarah was dead. I knew that. I'd held her hand in the hospital when she... "No," I whispered to myself. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." The knocking got louder. Bang, bang, bang. The whole RV shook. I could hear something scratching at the metal walls, like long nails dragging across them. I huddled in the corner of my RV, rifle pointed at the door until sunrise. When the first light came, everything stopped. Just like that. The forest was silent again. My hands were still trembling as I made myself some coffee. That's when I saw it through the front window. A deer carcass that wasn't there the night before. It was laid out perfectly in the snow, like someone had placed it there. But the way it was cut open, I'd never seen anything like it. The cuts were too clean, too precise. No animal could have done that. I knew I should leave. Everything in my gut was screaming at me to get out of there. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, maybe curiosity, or maybe something else was making me stay. I didn't know then that this was just the first warning. Things were about to get much, much worse. I tried starting my RV that morning, just to be safe. The engine made a weird clicking sound but wouldn't start. Great. Just great. While checking the engine, I noticed something in the fresh snow that made me step back. Footprints. But these weren't normal footprints. They were huge, maybe twice the size of my boot, and deeper than they should be. Like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They went in a perfect circle around my RV, exactly where the knocking had come from last night. Then they led into the forest. That's when I heard someone walking through the snow behind me. I wouldn't follow those if I were you. I spun around, rifle ready. A man stood there, tall, skinny, wearing an old orange hunting jacket. He looked about 60, with a gray beard and tired eyes. He had a hunting rifle too, but it was pointed down. "Name's Jack Peterson," he said, not moving any closer. "You need to leave this place." "My RV won't start," I told him. "What's going on here? What made those tracks?" Jack looked nervous, his eyes darting around the clearing. "The hungry ones," he whispered. "They're waking up early this year. The cold brings them out." "The hungry ones? What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, his voice getting lower. "Listen carefully. They'll come again tonight. They'll try to trick you. You'll hear voices, people you know, people you've lost. Don't listen. Don't let them in, no matter what." "Who's they?" I asked, but Jack was already backing away. "I've left some things at my camp that might help," he said. "Half a mile north by the Crooked Pine. Get them before dark. And whatever you hear, whatever you see, stay in your RV tonight." Before I could ask anything else, he disappeared into the trees. Just vanished, like he was never there. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me thought Jack was crazy, but those tracks in the snow, and that deer, and those knocks. The sky was getting darker already, even though it was only afternoon. More snow was coming. I had to make a choice, stay in my RV, or try to find Jack's camp. I checked my rifle, put on my warmest jacket, and grabbed my flashlight. If there were answers at Jack's camp, I needed to find them before night fell. I didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. The walk to Jack's camp felt longer than half a mile. The snow was getting deeper, and the wind kept whispering through the trees. I kept thinking I saw movements from the corner of my eye, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. I found the crooked pine Jack mentioned. It was hard to miss. The tree was huge and bent in a weird way, like something had twisted it. Below it was a small campsite, but something was wrong. Very wrong. Jack's tent was torn to pieces. His camping gear was scattered everywhere, like there had been a fight. But there was no blood, no signs of animals. Just deep footprints in the snow, the same massive ones I'd seen around my RV. My hands were shaking as I looked through his things. Under a fallen backpack, I found a leather journal. The pages were filled with Jack's messy handwriting and strange drawings. Some pages had old newspaper clippings about missing hunters in these woods, dozens of them, going back 50 years. Then I found something that made my heart stop. A photo from 1973 showed a group of hunters. In the middle was Jack, looking exactly the same as he did today, not a day older. But that was impossible. That photo was taken 3 years ago. Suddenly, I heard my brother Tommy's voice behind me. "Hey Marcus, remember Nam?" I froze. Tommy died in Vietnam. I saw it happen. I spun around, my rifle ready. Nobody was there. But between the trees, I saw something move. Something tall. Something that shouldn't exist. The sun was setting fast. Too fast. I grabbed Jack's journal and started running back to my RV. The forest seemed different now. The trees looked wrong, like they were bending away from me. And those footprints, they were appearing in the snow behind me as I ran, like something was following me. I reached my RV just as it was getting dark, slammed the door shut, locked it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold Jack's journal. That's when I heard it, screaming from somewhere in the forest. It sounded like Jack. Then the screaming stopped, and the knocking began again. But this time, it wasn't just knocks. This time, they were trying to get in. I huddled in my RV, trying to read Jack's journal by flashlight. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the knocking was getting louder. Bang, bang, bang. "Marcus, please let me in," Sarah's voice called again. "Why won't you help me?" I covered my ears and focused on the journal. Jack had written about something he called the Wendigo, an ancient evil that lived in these woods. It trapped people here, made them hear things, see things. Then it would. A loud crack interrupted my reading. Something had broken one of my RV's windows. Cold air rushed in. I could hear them climbing onto the roof. Thump, thump, thump. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, pointing them at the broken window. What I saw made me scream. Jack's face was there, but it wasn't Jack anymore. His skin was gray, his eyes completely black. Behind him were other faces, other hunters, all changed like him. They were trying to get in. "Join us, Marcus," they said together, their voices all wrong. "We're so hungry." I remembered what Jack's journal said about symbols that could protect against them. With shaking hands, I grabbed his journal and tore out a page with a strange drawing. I held it up to the window. The faces disappeared, shrieking, but I could still hear them on the roof. Then, everything went quiet. Too quiet. That's when I heard heavy footsteps in the snow outside. Something big was walking around my RV. My flashlight beam caught something in the side mirror. I wish I hadn't looked. It was tall, taller than any person should be. It had antlers like a deer, but wrong, twisted. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes were looking right at me. The Wendigo. It smiled at me in the mirror. It had too many teeth. "Your turn," it whispered in my brother Tommy's voice. And then it started tearing off my RV's roof. I backed into the RV's bathroom, the smallest, most defendable space I had left. The roof was peeling off like a sardine can. Snow and cold air poured in. I could hear them all moving above me, the changed hunters and that thing, that Wendigo. My fingers found Sarah's silver locket in my pocket. The moment I touched it, the creatures above shrieked. That's when I remembered something from Jack's journal. They hated silver and sacred things. I had one chance. I grabbed Sarah's locket, my rifle, and the journal pages with the symbols. The Wendigo's long, bony arm was reaching down through the roof. Its fingers were like ice-cold knives. "You're not my brother," I shouted. "You're not my wife. You're nothing but a monster." I shot my rifle straight up, again and again. The Wendigo screamed, a sound like winter wind and dying animals mixed together. But the bullets didn't stop it. It just laughed. Then I remembered what Jack wrote. The symbols had to touch them to work. With my last bullet, I wrapped a journal page around it and fired straight into the Wendigo's chest. The creature's scream this time was different. Real pain. It fell back, and the other hunters scattered like shadows in sunlight. I held up Sarah's locket, and the silver made them keep their distance. But I'd made a terrible mistake. The Wendigo wasn't dead. As it fell, its blood, black as oil, dripped through the torn roof. One drop hit my hand. It burned like fire. But the burn didn't stop. It started spreading up my arm. "Welcome, brother." The Wendigo laughed as it disappeared into the forest. I looked in my RV's mirror. My eyes, they were starting to turn black. That was 3 months ago. I'm writing this from a cave deep in the forest. I can't leave now. The hunger won't let me. I can feel myself changing more each day. Soon, I'll be like Jack and the others. If you're reading this, stay away from the Flathead forest. If you hear knocking at night, don't answer. And if you see me, run. Because when the hunger takes over completely, I won't be Marcus Thompson anymore. And I won't be able to stop myself from hunting you. My name is Rachel Martinez, and I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me when I was 8 years old. Something that still gives me nightmares, even today. It all started during that scorching summer of 1983, when my family decided to take a camping trip to the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. Back then, things weren't great at home. Dad had just lost his construction job, and Mom was worried about her teaching position at the school. I remember hearing them argue late at night when they thought Michael, that's my 15-year-old brother, and I were asleep. They thought this camping trip would help us become closer as a family. If only they knew what was waiting for us in those mountains. We packed up our old Fleetwood RV, one of those big boxy ones from the 80s. It was like a house on wheels, with its faded brown stripes on the sides and a squeaky door that never closed properly. Michael spent the whole drive complaining about missing his friends and taking pictures with his new camera. Mom and Dad had given it to him for his birthday just a month before. The heat was terrible that summer. The radio kept warning about a heat wave, but Dad said he knew what he was doing. He'd found this perfect spot in a hidden valley, away from the regular camping areas. I remember watching the temperature gauge on the RV's dashboard showing 110°4F as we drove deeper into the mountains. When we finally reached the valley, something felt different. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you're sure someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. The whole valley was surrounded by tall red rocks, and there were these weird drawings on them. Dad called them petroglyphs. They looked like stick figures dancing, but something about them made my stomach feel funny. As Dad parked the RV, I saw her for the first time. Just a quick glimpse between the rocks, a girl about my age, with long dark hair. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, and she was smiling at me. I blinked, and she was gone. I tried telling Mom about it, but she was busy helping Dad set up camp. "It's just the heat playing tricks on you, sweetie," she said. But I saw her looking nervously at the rocks. That first night, things started feeling wrong. Our dog, Max, wouldn't stop growling at nothing. Michael's camera kept making weird clicking sounds even when he wasn't using it. And the worst part? I could hear children laughing outside, but when I looked out the RV window, there was only darkness. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. The beginning of 5 days that would change my life forever. 5 days that would teach me that sometimes the monsters in our nightmares are real. And sometimes they wear familiar faces. On our second day in the valley, everything started getting weirder. I woke up early to find Mom standing outside the RV, holding pieces of old broken pottery she'd found. Her hands were shaking. "Rachel, honey, stay close to the RV today," she whispered, looking over her shoulder at the rocks. "Something doesn't feel right here." Later that morning, Dad tried to start the RV, just to run the air conditioning because it was so hot, but it wouldn't work. The engine made this horrible grinding noise, then nothing. Dad checked everything twice, but couldn't find what was wrong. I'd never seen him look so worried before. "That's impossible," he kept saying. "I just had it checked last week." Around lunchtime, when the heat was making the air look wavy, I saw her again, the girl from yesterday. This time she was closer, standing near a small group of trees. She waved at me. "I'm Lily," she said when I walked over. Her voice was soft, like wind chimes. "Want to play?" We spent the afternoon playing hide and seek among the rocks. Lily knew all the best hiding spots, but something was odd about her. Her feet didn't leave any marks in the dusty ground, and when I tried to touch her arm once, my hand felt cold, like when you stick it in the freezer. Michael was taking pictures of the rock drawings all day. When he checked his camera that evening, his face went white. "Dad," he called out, "you need to see this." In every picture Michael took of the rocks, there were dark shadows standing behind them, shadows that looked like people, but not quite right. Their arms were too long, their heads oddly shaped. That night, an old Native American man appeared at our campsite. He seemed to come out of nowhere, and his eyes looked so serious it scared me. "You must leave this valley," he told Dad. "This is not a place for your family. The ancient ones do not rest here, and they do not welcome visitors." Dad tried to argue, but then Max started barking like crazy. When we turned back, the old man was gone. Just gone. There wasn't anywhere he could have walked to so fast. I wanted to tell Mom and Dad about Lily, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd made me promise not to tell anyone about our games. Or maybe it was because deep down, I was starting to realize that Lily wasn't like other girls. That night was the coldest I'd ever felt in summer. We all huddled in the RV, listening to strange sounds outside, like footsteps, but not quite human. Max wouldn't stop growling at the windows, and I could have sworn I saw faces peering in at us through the darkness. But the worst part? When I looked out my window just before falling asleep, I saw Lily standing there, smiling. Only this time, her smile was different. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. And her eyes. Her eyes were glowing in the dark. I pulled my blanket over my head and tried not to cry. I had a feeling things were about to get much, much worse. On the third day, everything changed. I woke up to Mom screaming. Max was missing. We all ran outside to look for him, calling his name over and over. Dad told us to stay together, but the valley made echoes that made it sound like Max was everywhere at once. We found him 2 hours later, behind some rocks. I wish we hadn't. Something had. Hurt him really badly. His fur was all wrong, and there were marks on him that Dad said couldn't have been made by any normal animal. Mom made me and Michael go back to the RV while she and Dad buried Max. "It must have been coyotes," Dad said later, but his voice shook when he said it. I could tell he didn't believe it himself. That afternoon, weird symbols appeared on our RV windows, like someone had drawn them with dusty fingers, but from the inside. Mom tried to wipe them off, but they kept coming back. Michael took pictures of them, his hands trembling as he clicked the camera. "Rachel," he whispered to me later, showing me his camera screen, "look at these photos from yesterday. In every picture of me playing, there was Lily, but she looked wrong. In some pictures, she was too tall, her arms hanging down past her knees. In others, her face was blurry, like it was changing shape. That night, Lily came to my window again, but this time I was terrified. 'Let me in, Rachel,' she said, but her voice didn't sound like wind chimes anymore. It sounded like many voices speaking at once. 'We just want to play.' I heard Mom crying in the front of the RV. She kept saying she could feel something evil watching us. Dad had his baseball bat ready, sitting by the door. Michael hadn't said a word for hours, just kept looking through his photos with shaking hands. Around midnight, we started hearing voices outside. They sounded like people we knew, our neighbors from back home, my teacher, even my best friend Emma. But we were miles from anywhere. Nobody else was supposed to be here. "Don't answer them," Mom whispered. "No matter what you hear, don't answer them." The voices kept calling us, getting closer and closer to the RV. Then we heard a new sound, like nails scratching along the RV's metal sides, moving all around us in the darkness. I pulled my knees to my chest and covered my ears, but I could still hear them. The worst part was when they started using our own voices. I heard myself calling to Mom, begging her to help me, even though I was right there next to her. Dad held Mom's hand so tight his knuckles were white. Michael had pushed himself into the corner, still clutching his camera. And outside, the things that weren't really people kept calling, kept scratching, kept trying to get in. "They're hungry," Lily's voice whispered from right outside my window. "So hungry, and you're all so perfect." The fourth day was the worst. Mom said we needed firewood to keep warm at night. The temperatures kept dropping weirdly low after sunset. She didn't want to go alone, but Dad was still trying to fix the RV, and she didn't want us kids wandering around. "I'll just be quick," she said, hugging me and Michael. "I'll stay within shouting distance. You can watch me from the window." We did watch her. She was only about 50 feet away, picking up sticks. Then she went behind a big rock, and she never came back around the other side. "Mom?" I called out. No answer. Dad ran out there so fast, calling her name. Michael and I followed him, even though he told us to stay in the RV. We searched everywhere, but Mom was just gone. All we found was her red hair tie on the ground. Then we heard her voice. "Robert? Kids? I'm over here." It sounded exactly like Mom, coming from behind some rocks. "Linda?" Dad started walking toward the voice. "Don't!" Michael grabbed Dad's arm. "Look!" We all froze. Mom's voice was coming from those rocks, but we could hear her calling from the opposite direction too, then from somewhere else. Soon, Mom's voice was everywhere, calling us from all directions. Dad pushed us back toward the RV. "Run," he shouted. "Don't look back." As we ran, I saw shapes moving between the rocks, tall, twisted shapes that looked almost human, but wrong. And among them was Lily, but she wasn't a little girl anymore. She was changing, her body stretching and twisting like melting wax. We locked ourselves in the RV. Dad started pulling out everything he could find to block the windows, blankets, clothes, anything. That's when we heard Mom's screams. They didn't sound human anymore. "They're skinwalkers," Dad said, his voice shaking. He'd found some old papers in the valley that morning. Ancient evil spirits that can look like anyone they want. They trap people here, hunt them. Michael's camera started clicking by itself, taking picture after picture. When we looked at them, our blood went cold. The photos showed dozens of creatures surrounding our RV. They had long, twisted limbs and animal-like faces, but some of them were wearing Mom's face, stretched wrong over their not-human heads. "We have to get out of here," Dad whispered. "But they've damaged the RV. We'll have to run for it tomorrow, when there's light." That night was the longest of my life. We huddled together in the back of the RV, listening to the voices outside. They kept using Mom's voice, then started using all our voices, laughing and calling to each other. "Rachel." Lily's voice came from right outside my window. "Don't you want to see what your mom looks like now? Don't you want to play with us forever?" I buried my face in Dad's shirt, trying not to cry. But I knew, we all knew, that tomorrow would be our last chance to escape, if we could escape at all. The 5th day started before sunrise. Dad woke us up really early, when it was still dark. He had a plan. "Listen carefully," he whispered, holding both me and Michael close. "We need to split up." His voice was shaking, but he tried to sound brave. "They can't chase all of us at once." Michael grabbed his camera. "Dad, no. We have to stay together." But Dad wouldn't listen. He gave us each a flashlight and his old lighter. "If they come near you, use the fire. They're afraid of it. Michael, you take Rachel and run east, toward where the sun will rise. I'll go the other way and distract them." That's when we heard them coming, scratching at the RV walls, whispering with Mom's voice, with our voices. The whole RV started to shake. "Now!" Dad shouted, throwing open the door. He ran out first, waving his baseball bat and shouting to draw their attention. Michael grabbed my hand and we ran. I could hear awful sounds behind us, screeching and growling that didn't sound like any animal I knew. I didn't look back, but Michael did. I heard his camera click one last time. "Don't stop," he yelled, pulling me harder. We ran between the rocks, trying to find a way out of the valley. That's when I saw Lily again, standing right in front of us. But she wasn't trying to look like a little girl anymore. She was tall, so tall, with arms that touched the ground and too many teeth in her smile. "Going somewhere?" she asked in that many voices way. Michael pushed me behind him and flicked the lighter. The flame was small, but Lily stepped back. Then we heard Dad screaming. Michael looked back, just for a second. That was all it took. More of them came from behind the rocks, twisted, wrong-looking things wearing faces that didn't fit right. Some had Mom's face, some had Dad's. They moved so fast. "Rachel, run!" Michael shoved me hard away from them. "Don't stop. Don't look back." I ran. I ran until my legs hurt and my lungs burned. Behind me, I heard Michael's camera click one last time, then a scream that still haunts my nightmares. I found a small cave and crawled inside, making myself as small as possible. I stayed there, shaking, as the sun slowly came up. The skinwalkers kept walking past my hiding spot, calling out with my family's voices, but they couldn't find me. Hours later, some hikers found me. They said I was alone in the valley, no RV, no signs of my family, nothing. Just me, crying in a cave. The police searched for days, but never found my family. They found Michael's camera, though, smashed to pieces. Only one photo was still good, the last one he took. I've never shown it to anyone. It shows what the skinwalkers really look like, and what they did to my family. Sometimes I think about Lily and wonder if she's still there, waiting for another family to come camping. Because the worst part? When the rescue team found me, one of them was a little girl with long dark hair. She smiled at me with too many teeth as they carried me away. I'm older now, but I still hear them sometimes at night, calling with my family's voices, waiting. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see Lily's smile starting to form on my own face. Hi, my name is James Wilson. I'm a 22-year-old psychology student, and I'm about to tell you something that still gives me nightmares. What happened in Michigan's Upper Peninsula during spring break of 1991 changed my life forever. Some nights, I still wake up in cold sweat, hearing those howls. It all started when my friends and I decided to go camping. There was Derek, my best friend since high school. A smart guy who knew everything about surviving in the wild, even though he had bad asthma. Then there was Maria, the bravest girl I've ever known. She was always interested in old stories and legends, especially the scary ones. Derek's uncle had this big old Winnebago RV from 1985. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect for our trip. The plan was simple: drive up to Peninsula State Forest, spend a few days exploring, and have some fun during spring break. If only we knew what was waiting for us there. The drive started out great. We were singing along to Derek's favorite rock songs, eating junk food, and telling jokes. But as we got closer to the forest, something felt different. The sky turned gray, and this weird fog started rolling in. It wasn't normal fog, it was thick, and seemed to move in ways fog shouldn't. "Guys, check this out," Maria said, reading from her book about local history. "This area used to be sacred ground for Native American tribes. They have all these stories about shadow creatures and things that hunt in the dark." Derek laughed it off, but I noticed him gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Come on, Maria. Don't start with the scary stories yet. We haven't even set up camp." Little did we know, we were driving straight into a nightmare. The real scary story was about to begin, and no book could have prepared us for what was coming. It was almost sunset when we finally found a spot to park the RV. We were on this old logging road that hadn't been used in years. Trees were everywhere, so tall they seemed to touch the sky. The fog was getting thicker, and even though it was March, the air was weirdly cold. "This looks good," Derek said, parking the RV. "We can set up our camping chairs here and maybe start a fire." I helped Derek set up while Maria walked around taking pictures. That's when I noticed something strange. The birds had stopped chirping. You know how forests are usually noisy with all sorts of animal sounds? Well, everything was just quiet. Too quiet. "Hey guys," Maria called out softly. "Come look at this." We walked over to where she was standing. On a huge oak tree, there were these deep marks, like claw marks, but they were bigger than any bear claw marks I'd ever seen. They were fresh too. The wood still looked raw. "Maybe it's just a really big bear," I said. trying to sound calm. But deep down, something felt very wrong. Derek pulled out his inhaler and took a quick puff. He always did that when he was nervous. "Let's get back to the RV and start dinner. It's getting dark." As we walked back, I saw something move between the trees. It was just for a second, but it looked like a shadow, except shadows don't move when there's nothing making them. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired from the drive. Inside the RV, we made hot dogs and tried to get the old radio working. It only picked up static at first, but then we heard something else. Through the static, there was this sound, like howling, but not from any wolf I'd ever heard. It sounded almost human. Maria turned the radio off quickly. "Maybe we should all get some sleep," she suggested. "It's been a long day." None of us wanted to admit it, but we were all feeling it. That creeping feeling you get when you know something's watching you. We closed all the RV's curtains and locked the doors, but somehow I knew this was just the beginning of our nightmare. None of us could sleep that first night. Every little sound made us jump. Around midnight, the fog outside got so thick I couldn't even see the trees anymore through the RV windows. "Did you guys hear that?" Derek whispered suddenly. We all sat up in our sleeping bags. At first, I heard nothing. Then it came, a low growl, but not like any animal I knew. It seemed to come from all directions at once. "There's more than one," Maria said, her voice shaking. She was right. We could hear them circling the RV, their feet crunching on the dead leaves. Then something hit the side of our RV. Thump. The whole vehicle shook. Derek grabbed his flashlight, but before he could turn it on, we saw them, shadows moving past our windows. But these shadows were wrong. They were too tall, too big to be human, and they were moving on their own, without anything casting them. "Keep quiet," I whispered. "Maybe they'll go away." We huddled together in the middle of the RV. Derek's breathing was getting worse. I could hear him wheezing. He reached for his inhaler with trembling hands. The radio suddenly came to life by itself. Through the static, we heard something that made my blood freeze. It was a voice, but distorted, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Maria quickly unplugged the radio, but the voice continued for a few seconds before fading away. "We need to leave," Derek said, "first thing in the morning." But when we looked outside, the shadows were still there, moving between the trees. Something told me they weren't going to let us leave that easily. The worst part? This was just our first night. We had no idea that what was out there was more than just shadows. They were hunting us, and they were getting closer. None of us slept until the sun finally came up. When we looked outside, what we saw made us wish it was still dark. In a perfect circle around our RV were dead animals, rabbits, squirrels, and birds. They weren't torn up or eaten. They were just dead, like they'd been placed there on purpose. "We need to get out of here now," I said, trying to stay calm. But when Derek turned the key in the ignition, the RV just made a clicking sound. It wouldn't start. "This is impossible," Derek said, checking under the hood. "Everything was fine yesterday." Maria was looking through her books about local legends. Her hands were shaking. "Guys, I found something. The Native Americans who lived here wrote about creatures they called shadow walkers. They could control darkness and they hunted in packs." "That's just a story," I said. But even I didn't believe myself anymore. Suddenly, Derek started coughing badly. His asthma was getting worse. I need to get some air," he wheezed, heading for the door. "Derek, wait!" Maria called out, but he was already outside. I followed him out. The fog was still there, but different now. It seemed to move away from the sunlight in ways that fog shouldn't. Derek was using his inhaler near a big tree when I saw it. Behind him, a shadow was moving up the tree trunk. But the shadow, it had eyes. Glowing, yellow eyes. "Derek!" I screamed. "Run!" He turned around just as the shadow lunged. We both ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind us. Through the windows, we could see more shadows gathering. They were getting bolder, moving even in daylight now. "They're not just shadows anymore," Maria whispered. "Look." In the fog, we could see them taking shape, tall, dark figures, standing on two legs. And those eyes, those horrible yellow eyes. We spent the whole day trapped in the RV, watching those things circle around us. Derek's asthma was getting worse, and we were running out of food. The shadows kept getting closer, and the fog was so thick now we could barely see anything beyond our windows. "I need to try something," Maria said, pulling out an old book. "My grandmother taught me some protection rituals. Maybe they'll help." Just then, Derek started coughing really bad. I need my spare inhaler," he gasped. "It's in my backpack outside. I dropped it when we ran." My heart sank. The backpack was only about 20 feet from the RV, but with those things out there, "I'll get it," I said, trying to sound brave. "Maria, keep doing your ritual thing." I grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the RV door. The cold hit me first, then the silence. Everything was too quiet. I could see Derek's backpack near a tree. Just a quick run, grab it, and back. I made it to the backpack, but when I turned around, my flashlight beam hit something that made me freeze. Standing between me and the RV was this thing. It was like a shadow come to life, taller than any person I'd ever seen. Its yellow eyes stared right at me, and its mouth. Oh, God. Its mouth was full of teeth that glowed like moonlight. I heard Maria screaming from the RV. More of them were coming out of the fog. I ran as fast as I could, but not toward the RV. I had to lead them away from my friends. I could hear them behind me, their feet making weird sounds on the ground. Then I heard Derek scream. When I turned around, he wasn't in the RV anymore. Somehow, they had gotten him. The last thing I saw was Derek being pulled into the shadows, his hand reaching out. Everything happened so fast after that. I ran back to the RV, my lungs burning. Maria was crying, trying to draw strange symbols on the windows with her marker. "They took him," she kept saying. "They just pulled him right through the shadows." We could hear Derek's screams getting farther away, then suddenly stopping. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. "We have to find him," I said, grabbing our last flashlight. Maria nodded, her hands shaking as she held her book of legends. The fog was thicker now, but we had no choice. We followed the weird marks on the ground that looked like huge paw prints. They led us deeper into the forest, to a place where the trees grew so close together that no sunlight got through. Then we found it, Derek's inhaler, broken on the ground. Next to it was something that made my stomach turn, claw marks in the dirt and dark stains that looked like. I didn't want to think about it. "James?" Maria whispered, pointing ahead. "Look." Through the trees, we saw what looked like a cave, but it wasn't normal. The entrance was like a hole made of pure darkness. Around it were bones, lots of them. Some looked human. We heard movement inside the cave. Those yellow eyes appeared again, but more of them this time. 10, 20, maybe more pairs of eyes, all staring at us. And behind them, deeper in the cave, we heard something that sounded like Derek's voice, but wrong, like it was coming from underwater. "We're too late," Maria said, backing away. "That's not Derek anymore. These things, they don't just kill people, they change them." The creatures started coming out of the cave, moving like liquid shadows. They were hurting us, pushing us back toward our RV. But they weren't attacking, they were playing with us, like cats playing with mice. We ran back to the RV, but these things, they were just toying with us. They could have caught us any time they wanted. Inside the RV, Maria frantically flipped through her book. "There's something here," she said, her voice shaking. "The legends say they can't stand bright light. Not just any light, it has to be pure, like flames from sacred wood." I remembered seeing some old cedar trees near the ranger station. The Native Americans considered cedar sacred, I said. "Maybe if we—" Crash! Something hit the RV roof hard. We could hear them walking up there, their claws scraping against the metal. The windows started fogging up, but from the inside, the temperature dropped so low we could see our breath. Then we heard it, Derek's voice, but wrong, calling from outside. James, Maria, come out. It doesn't hurt anymore. They want to show you something. Maria grabbed my arm. That's not Derek, she whispered. They're using his voice to trick us. The shadows were seeping in through every crack now. Our flashlight batteries were dying, and the darkness was getting thicker. One of the shadows touched Maria's leg, and she screamed. It left a mark like a burn. I knew we had only one chance. Maria, keep reading from your book. I'm going to make a run for that cedar wood. You can't go out there, she grabbed my arm. They'll get you too. If I don't, we're both dead anyway. Just then, all the RV windows shattered at once. I could see their yellow eyes everywhere, and among them, one pair of eyes that looked familiar, Derek's eyes. But now they glowed just like theirs. I knew we had only seconds left. I grabbed Maria's hand and pulled her toward the RV's emergency exit at the back. When I say run, you run as fast as you can toward the ranger station, I whispered. The creatures were coming in through the broken windows now. Their bodies were like smoke, but their claws and teeth looked real enough. The thing that used to be Derek was in front, reaching for us with hands that were now more like shadow claws. Now, I yelled, throwing our last flashlight at them. The beam of light made them back up just enough. We burst out of the RV and ran. The forest was chaos. Shadows moved everywhere, trying to grab us. I could hear them running beside us, their feet making weird sounds on the dead leaves. Maria was repeating words from her book, some kind of protection prayer. We were almost at the ranger station when I felt something grab my jacket. I pushed Maria ahead. Get the cedar, I'll hold them off. James, no. Just go. I turned to face them. Derek, or what was left of him, was right there. His skin was now dark as night, his eyes burning yellow. Behind him, more shadow creatures emerged from the darkness. They were all around me now. You should have joined us when you had the chance, Derek's voice said, but it wasn't really his voice anymore. It was like many voices speaking together. I saw Maria running back with burning cedar branches. The creatures hissed at the light, backing away. But I knew we couldn't fight them all. I made my choice then. I grabbed a burning branch and charged at the biggest shadow creature, the pack leader. Maria, run! Don't look back! The last thing I heard was Maria's screams as I pushed the alpha creature back into the darkness, the cedar branch burning in my hand. Maria made it out alive. At least, that's what the rescue team said when they found her 2 days later, walking along the highway in a daze. They never found me or Derek. The RV was there, all broken up, with claw marks everywhere. But our bodies? Gone. The official story was that we were attacked by bears. Nobody believed Maria's story about shadow creatures and glowing eyes. They said she was in shock, imagining things. But I know the truth, because I'm still here, watching. You see, I didn't die that night, but I'm not alive either. When I pushed that alpha creature into the darkness, something happened. I became part of them. Now I'm like Derek, a shadow among shadows. Sometimes on really dark nights, I can almost touch the real world again. Maria knows. 3 months after that night, she found out she was pregnant. The doctor said everything was normal, but she could feel something different about the baby. Sometimes, when she turns off the lights, she sees its shadow moving on the wall, even when the baby isn't moving. I watch over her and the baby from the shadows. We all do. Derek is here too. We're not evil anymore. At least I don't think we are. We're just different. Part of something older than time itself. So next time you're alone in the dark and you see a shadow move in a way it shouldn't, or hear something that sounds almost like a voice calling your name, just remember, we're still here, watching, waiting. And sometimes, if the darkness is just right, we might reach out and, well, maybe some stories are better left unfinished. My name is Thomas Walsh, and I never thought I'd be writing this down. Some nights, I still wake up in cold sweat, remembering what happened at Creek Campground. But I need to tell this story. People need to know the truth about what's hiding in those ancient forests of Mount Hood. It all started in September 1967. I was 28 then, just married to the most beautiful woman I'd ever known, Catherine. She was 25, worked as a school librarian, and had this amazing talent for art. Me? I was working at the local lumber mill after serving in the Marines. Times were tough with the logging strike going on, but we had saved enough for a proper honeymoon. We had this brand new 1967 Dodge Travco RV, our pride and joy. Catherine decorated the inside with her little paintings and curtains she made herself. It was supposed to be our cozy home on wheels for a 2-week camping trip. Just us, the mountains, and endless possibilities. We could go to the beach, Catherine had suggested, but I wanted to show her the mountains. I knew this quiet spot near Mount Hood. At least, I thought I did. The logging strike meant most camping areas would be empty. Perfect for newlyweds, right? I remember that morning so clearly. Catherine was wearing her favorite blue dress, her dark hair tied back with a red ribbon. She was making coffee in our RV while I checked the map one last time. "Are you sure about this place, Tom?" she asked, handing me a steaming cup. "The guy at the gas station seemed pretty worried when you mentioned Red Creek." I laughed it off then. "Oh, those locals love their scary stories. Probably just trying to keep their secret fishing spots to themselves." If only I had listened. If only I had noticed how the birds went quiet as we drove deeper into the forest. If only I had paid attention to the way the mist seemed to follow our RV, even though it was an unusually warm September day. But I didn't. Instead, I drove us straight into what would become our worst nightmare. A nightmare that started with an overgrown dirt road and a broken wooden sign that read, "Red Creek Campground, no entry." I remember turning onto that old dirt road, our RV bumping along as Catherine held onto her coffee cup. The trees seemed to get bigger and darker the further we went. The sunlight barely made it through the thick branches above us. "Tom, are you sure this is right?" Catherine asked, biting her lip. "We haven't seen another car for miles." "That's what makes it perfect, honey," I said, trying to sound confident. "We'll have the whole place to ourselves." After about 10 minutes of slow driving, we found the campground. It wasn't much, just a clearing surrounded by massive trees. There were old picnic tables covered in moss and a broken fire pit. Everything looked like it hadn't been used in years. I parked our RV near what looked like the best spot, facing the trees. As I stepped out, something felt different. The air was heavy and warm, unusual for September. There was this weird mist that seemed to hang around the treetops, even though it was middle of the day. Catherine started setting up her art supplies outside. She always loved drawing nature, and these woods were definitely something special. I watched her start sketching the strange way the trees grew, some of them twisted together like they were holding hands. That's when I noticed the first weird thing. While walking around to check the area, I found footprints in the soft dirt near the edge of our camping spot. They were huge, bigger than anything I'd seen before. At first, I thought maybe it was just some marks from old logging equipment, but these were clearly foot-shaped. And fresh. "Hey, Kath," I called out. "Come look at this." She walked over, her sketchbook in hand. When she saw the prints, her face went pale. "Those aren't bear tracks, are they?" "No," I said slowly. "They're not bear tracks." As we stood there looking at those prints, we heard it for the first time, a deep, rhythmic thumping sound, like someone beating a huge drum, coming from deep in the forest. It was so faint we could barely hear it, but it was there. Catherine grabbed my arm. "Tom, maybe we should find another campground." I almost agreed with her, but the sun was setting, and I didn't want to drive those rough roads in the dark. "Let's stay just for tonight," I said. "If we still feel weird tomorrow, we'll leave." That was my second mistake. The first was coming to Red Creek at all. As darkness fell, the drumming got louder, and that was just the beginning of our first night at Red Creek Campground. That first night in the RV was when things started getting really strange. Catherine and I had just finished our simple dinner of sandwiches when the drumming suddenly got louder. It wasn't just drums anymore. There were other sounds too, like chanting in some language I'd never heard before. "Tom?" Catherine whispered, clutching my arm. "What is that?" I tried to act brave, even though my heart was racing. "Probably just some campers having fun further up the mountain," I said, but I didn't believe my own words. Around midnight, the mist outside got thicker. It was like a white blanket wrapping around our RV. Through the windows, we could barely see the trees anymore. The air felt heavy and weird, like right before a big storm. Catherine was trying to sleep, but I noticed she kept tossing and turning. Then she sat up suddenly, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I heard it too. Footsteps, heavy ones, circling our RV. Whatever was making those footprints we found earlier was out there, walking around us. Then came the smell, like wet earth and something rotting. It was so strong it seemed to seep through the RV's walls. I grabbed my flashlight, my old Marine training kicking in. "Stay here," I told Catherine. But before I could even reach the door, something hit the side of our RV. Thump! The whole vehicle shook. Catherine screamed, and I dropped my flashlight. Thump! Another hit from the other side. Through the window, I saw something move in the mist. It was huge, much bigger than any man. For a split second, I saw what looked like a face pressing against the glass, but it wasn't human. It had deep-set eyes that seemed to glow, and its face was covered in thick, dark hair. "Tom!" Catherine's voice was shaking. She was pointing at the ceiling of the RV. Something was up there, walking around. The metal roof creaked under its weight. We huddled together in the dark, listening to whatever it was moving above us. The drumming in the forest got louder and louder, and now it seemed like it was coming from all directions. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything went quiet. The footsteps stopped. The drumming faded away. Even the mist started to clear. We didn't sleep at all that night. As the sun came up, I went outside to check the RV. What I found made my blood run cold. Huge handprints, pressed into the metal sides of our vehicle, and strange symbols carved into the dirt around us. Catherine came out and started drawing the symbols in her sketchbook. "Tom," she said quietly, "I had dreams last night. Strange dreams. I saw things in the forest. They were calling me. I should have packed up right then and driven us out of there. But something kept us there, like the forest itself didn't want us to leave. And what we found later that day made everything even worse. After that scary night, I decided to look around the campground in daylight. Catherine stayed close to me, still drawing in her sketchbook, but her drawings were different now, darker, stranger. She kept drawing the same symbols we found in the dirt, over and over. While walking, we found something that made us both freeze. An old trail leading deeper into the woods. Next to it was a sign so weathered we could barely read it. "Warning, research area, no trespassing." "We should check it out," Catherine said, her voice sounding odd, almost excited. I noticed she seemed different since morning, like she was in some kind of daze. Following the trail, we found an old cave entrance. The strange thing was, it didn't look natural. The opening was perfectly round, like someone or something had carved it. "Look at this," Catherine called out. The cave walls were covered in paintings. They showed tall, hairy creatures standing in circles around smaller figures, humans. Some paintings showed the humans changing, becoming like the creatures. That's when we heard someone behind us. "You folks shouldn't be here." We spun around to see a man in a forest ranger uniform. His name tag read Peterson, but something about him seemed off. His eyes were nervous, and his hands were shaking. "This area is restricted," he said. "There's been some incidents." "What kind of incidents?" I asked. Ranger Peterson looked around like he was scared someone might hear him. "People going missing, strange sounds. The locals won't come near this place anymore." He paused, then added quietly, "They say the forest takes people." Just then, Catherine dropped her sketchbook. When I picked it up, I saw her latest drawing. It showed Ranger Peterson, but he was hanging upside down in a tree. his body twisted in impossible ways. "You need to leave," Peterson said urgently. "Before dark. Before they—" He stopped suddenly, his eyes going wide as drums started beating in the distance. "Too late," he whispered. "They know you're here now." Catherine swayed on her feet, her eyes rolling back. When she spoke, her voice wasn't her own anymore. It was deep and ancient, speaking words I didn't understand. The drums got louder, and the air turned misty again, even though it was middle of the day. Ranger Peterson started backing away. "Get to your RV," he said. "Lock the doors. Don't come out no matter what you hear. And whatever you do, don't answer if they call your names." He turned and ran, leaving us alone at the cave entrance. Catherine was still speaking in that strange voice, and the drums were getting closer. We ran back to our RV, but what happened that night was worse than anything we could have imagined. That afternoon, things got worse fast. Catherine wouldn't stop drawing. Her pictures showed terrible things: people being dragged into the woods, giant hairy creatures dancing around fires, and Ranger Peterson, exactly how she'd drawn him earlier. We locked ourselves in the RV. As the sun started setting, Catherine sat by the window, her eyes glassy, whispering words I couldn't understand. I tried to start the RV, but it wouldn't work. We were stuck. "Tom," Catherine said suddenly, her voice shaking. "They're coming." Through the windows, I saw them, dark shapes moving in the mist. They were huge, at least 12 feet tall, walking on 2 legs. I counted 5. No, 7 of them. They formed a circle around our RV. Then we heard screaming from the woods. It was Ranger Peterson. "Help! Oh God, help me!" His voice was getting closer. I wanted to help him, but Catherine grabbed my arm. "Don't," she said. "It's a trick." She was right. The screams didn't sound quite human anymore. They turned into howls that made our skin crawl. Thump. Something hit our RV roof again. Catherine started crying, but her tears were red, like blood. "Me, Tom," she whispered. "They've been waiting for someone like me." The creatures outside started chanting. It was the same strange language Catherine had been speaking. To my horror, she started answering them. "Catherine, stop," I begged, but she wasn't herself anymore. Her eyes had turned completely black. Suddenly, all the windows of our RV shattered at once. The cold mist poured in, and with it came the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. Through the broken window, I saw one of them clearly for the first time, a massive face covered in dark hair, with eyes that glowed like burning coals. Catherine stood up, walking towards the broken window like she was in a trance. I tried to stop her, but some invisible force threw me against the RV wall. "Tom," she said, turning to me one last time. Her face was changing, becoming something else. "They're not what we think. They're ancient. They're powerful. And they've chosen me." That's when they reached in through the windows with their huge hands. I fought as hard as I could, but I couldn't stop them from taking her. The last thing I saw was Catherine walking into the mist, surrounded by those monsters, as the drums beat louder and louder. But what happened next was even worse, because that's when I found out what they really wanted, and why they had brought us to Red Creek. I ran out of the RV after Catherine, even though I could barely see through the thick mist. The drums were so loud now that I felt them in my chest. As I stumbled through the woods, I found something that made me sick to my stomach: Ranger Peterson, hanging upside down in a tree, exactly like Catherine had drawn. Then I saw the lights, dozens of them, glowing red in the darkness ahead. They were forming a huge circle in a clearing I hadn't seen before. As I got closer, I realized they weren't lights at all. They were eyes. In the middle of the circle stood Catherine. She wasn't crying anymore. Her skin had turned gray, and dark hair was growing on her arms. The creatures were all around her, swaying to the drum beats. "Catherine," I shouted, "please come back." She turned to look at me, but her face wasn't human anymore. "Tom," she said, her voice deeper than before, "I understand now. They didn't take me. They woke me up. I've always been one of them." The biggest creature, their leader, I guess, stepped forward. It must have been twice my size, but instead of attacking me, it spoke in my head. She speaks truth. The voice boomed in my mind. Your Catherine carries ancient blood. The forest has called her home. I pulled out my hunting knife, ready to fight. The creatures just laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. You cannot stop what has already begun, the voice said. But you have a choice. Join us or leave. The forest spares you because of her. Catherine walked toward me, her movements strange and animal-like. Tom, please, she said, don't make this harder. This is who I really am. I looked at my wife, the woman I loved, turning into something from our worst nightmares. But when I looked in her eyes, I still saw her in there, somewhere. Go, she whispered. Live. Tell our story, but change the names, change the place. They'll come for you if you don't. The creatures parted, making a path for me to leave. As I backed away, I saw Catherine join their circle. The drumming reached a crazy pace, and she threw her head back and howled, a sound that still haunts my dreams. I ran all night through the woods. When I finally reached the main road, the sun was coming up. A truck driver found me and took me to the nearest town. Nobody believed my story, of course. The police searched but found nothing. No RV, no Catherine, no monsters. They said the logging strike had made me crazy. Said Catherine had just left me. But I know the truth. Sometimes, on warm nights when the mist rolls in, I hear drums in the distance. And I know Catherine is out there in the ancient forests of Mount Hood, running with her new family. If you're ever camping in Oregon, and you see a broken sign pointing to Red Creek Campground, drive away, drive far and fast, because they're still there, waiting in the mist. And they're always looking for new people to join their clan. My name is Peter Hamilton, and I work as a forest ranger in Pennsylvania. I need to tell you about something terrible that happened at Pine Hollow Lake. It's been almost 30 years, but I still get nightmares about those 5 days in May 1995. Days that changed everything and took my brother Kevin away from me. I remember it was a rainy Thursday morning when Kevin called. I was surprised because we hadn't talked much since Dad passed away last year. Hey, Pete, Kevin said, sounding excited like when we were kids. Guess what I found? Dad's old RV. You know, that 1978 GMC we used to camp in? I fixed it up, and, well, I was thinking maybe we could go camping? To Dad's special spot near the lake? I looked out my cabin window at the heavy rain and weird fog that had been hanging around for weeks. Something felt off about the forest lately. The animals were acting strange, and the lake, well, the lake wasn't right. But Kevin was trying to fix our relationship, and I missed my big brother. Sure, I said, trying to sound happy. When do you want to go? This weekend. I found something else too, Dad's old journal. Never knew he kept one. Don't you want to know what he wrote about that lake? He always said it was special. I should have said no. Should have made up some excuse. But how could I know that Dad's special spot would turn into our worst nightmare? The next day, I met Kevin at the old gas station near the forest entrance. There it was, Dad's RV, looking almost new with fresh paint. Kevin jumped out, wearing his expensive city clothes that looked funny against the muddy forest background. He was still my brother, but Pittsburgh and his fancy banking job had changed him. Me? I stayed close to home, became a forest ranger, lived a simple life. Ready for an adventure, little brother? Kevin grinned, holding up Dad's old leather journal. If only we knew what kind of adventure was waiting for us at Pine Hollow Lake. If only we'd left that journal unopened. If only. Should I tell you what happened when we got to the lake? Trust me, it's not a happy camping story. Some things in those woods, well, they should stay hidden. But people need to know the truth about Pine Hollow Lake, about what lives in those dark waters. The drive to Pine Hollow Lake took about an hour. The whole time, Kevin kept reading bits from Dad's journal. but I was too focused on the weird fog around us. It was thick and seemed to move in ways fog shouldn't. "Look at this, Pete," Kevin said, pointing to a page. "Dad wrote about some kind of underwater cave near our usual camping spot. Says he found strange markings inside." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Dad never mentioned any cave to me. "There's more," Kevin kept reading. He wrote about lights under the water at night. And, hold on, what's this about missing campers? Just then, we turned the final corner and saw Pine Hollow Lake through the trees. The water looked black, even though it was middle of the day. No birds flying around, no fish jumping, just dead silence. That wasn't normal. In my 15 years as a ranger, I'd never seen the lake this quiet. We parked the RV in Dad's old spot, right where some ancient stone markers made a half circle near the water. I'd seen these stones 100 times before, but today they looked different. The carvings on them seemed deeper, and was that water seeping out of them? "Pete, come, look at this," Kevin called from the lakeside. He was crouching near the water, pointing at something. "The water's moving the wrong way." He was right. While the main lake current moved left to right, there was a small stream of water flowing in the opposite direction, like something under the surface was pulling it. We set up camp, but everything felt wrong. The RV's metal walls kept making weird pinging sounds, like something was tapping from the outside. And every time I looked at the lake, I could swear I saw ripples moving toward our camp, even when there was no wind. As the sun started setting, we heard voices, other campers on the far side of the lake. Their flashlights looked like floating stars in the fog. But something about their movement seemed odd, like they were all walking in the same pattern. "Should we go say hello?" Kevin asked. "No," I said quickly, not knowing why. "Let's just stay here tonight." We heated up some canned soup and sat in the RV. Kevin kept reading Dad's journal, getting quieter and quieter. Outside, the fog got thicker, and the tapping on the RV walls grew louder. "Pete," Kevin whispered suddenly, his face pale. "Listen to what Dad wrote the night before his last camping trip. It's not just a lake. There's something down there, something old. It calls to me every night now. I have to know what's in that cave." That's when we heard it. A long, low sound, like a whale's song, but wrong somehow. It came from the lake, and it made the water in our drinking cups vibrate. Kevin's hand started shaking. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. I wanted to agree, to suggest we leave right then. But something kept us there. Was it curiosity? Dad's journal? Or was something else already working its way into our minds? The night got darker, and the sounds got closer. We didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. The real horror would start tomorrow, when Kevin decided to go swimming. I couldn't sleep that night. The tapping on the RV walls never stopped, and every time I looked out the window, I saw those weird ripples in the lake moving toward us. Kevin tossed and turned in his bunk, mumbling something about water and voices. Morning came with more fog and a strange smell like rotten seaweed. I made coffee while Kevin sat outside, staring at the lake. He looked different somehow. His face was pale, and dark circles had formed under his eyes. "I had dreams about swimming," he said, not looking at me. "The water, it was calling me, showing me things." "Kevin, maybe we should pack up and—" "No," he snapped, then smiled weakly. "Sorry, I want to check something first. Dad's journal mentions a special spot in the lake. I want to see it." Before I could stop him, Kevin pulled off his shirt and walked toward the water. The lake surface was like black glass, and those weird ripples seemed to reach out to him. "Kevin, wait!" I grabbed Dad's journal and flipped through it frantically. There was something about the lake being dangerous, about people going missing after swimming. But when I looked up, Kevin was already waist deep in the water. That's when I noticed the other campers. They stood along the shoreline, at least 10 people, all staring at the lake. They were completely still, like statues. One woman slowly walked into the water. Then another man followed. "Kevin, get out of there, now!" He turned to look at me. and my heart stopped. His eyes were different, cloudy, like the fog over the lake. But Pete, don't you hear it? The singing? It's beautiful. The low sound came again, louder this time. It made my head hurt and my vision blur. The water around Kevin started moving in strange patterns, like hundreds of invisible fingers were reaching up. I ran into the lake to grab him, but the water was ice cold, colder than any lake should be in May. My legs went numb almost instantly. Kevin was swimming now, going deeper, and other campers were following him. That's when I saw it, something huge moving under the black water, a shadow bigger than anything that should be in a lake, and it was heading straight for my brother. "Kevin!" He dove under just as I reached him. My hands grabbed empty water. When he came up again, he was smiling. But it wasn't his smile anymore. Water poured from his mouth as he spoke. "Pete, you need to see this. There's a whole city down there." The other campers were getting closer, all with the same empty smiles. The weird sound got louder, and the fog started swirling around us like it was alive. I knew I had to get Kevin out, but how do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved? And then, in the middle of the lake, the water began to rise. The water rose like a huge bubble, dark and shiny. My whole body was telling me to run, but I couldn't leave Kevin. The other campers started humming, a deep, weird sound that matched the noise from the lake. "Look, Pete," Kevin pointed at the rising water. "They're coming to welcome us." That's when I saw them, shapes moving inside the water bubble. They weren't human, they weren't fish, they were something else. Long, dark things with too many arms, twisting and turning like underwater snakes. I grabbed Kevin's arm. "We need to go, now!" But he pulled away, stronger than I'd ever felt him before. "Don't you get it? This is what Dad found. This is why the lake was special." Water was dripping from his eyes now, but it wasn't tears. It was black, like ink. The other campers started walking deeper into the lake, still humming. Their eyes were completely white now. One by one, they disappeared under the surface, leaving ripples that moved the wrong way. "Kevin, please." My voice was shaking. "Think about Mom, about your life in Pittsburgh." He turned to me, and for a second, I saw my real brother in there, scared and confused. "Pete, I can't fight it. The water, it's in my head now. They're showing me things. Cities under the lake. Secrets." He grabbed my shoulders. "You have to read Dad's last pages. He knew. He knew everything." The water bubble burst suddenly, sending waves everywhere. That's when I saw it clearly, a massive shape rising from the lake. It was like a giant squid, but wrong in every way. Its skin was changing colors, and it had eyes, hundreds of eyes. Kevin's grip on my shoulders got tighter. His skin felt cold and slippery. "They want us to join them, Pete. All of us, just like Dad did." "What do you mean, like Dad did?" But before he could answer, tentacles shot out of the water. Not normal tentacles, but ones that seemed made of darkness itself. They wrapped around Kevin and the remaining campers. I tried to hold on to him, fighting against the pull of those terrible arms. "Kevin!" The last thing I saw was his face, changing, morphing into something that wasn't human anymore. He smiled one last time, but now his teeth were sharp and black. "Read the journal, Pete. Find out what Dad became. Then you'll understand. You'll join us too." The tentacles pulled him under, and the lake went quiet again. I stood there, waist deep in the cold water, completely alone. That's when I heard something moving inside the RV. I ran to the RV, my wet clothes heavy and cold. The door was open, swinging back and forth even though there was no wind. Inside, water was dripping from the ceiling, but it wasn't normal water, it was black, like the stuff that came from Kevin's eyes. Dad's journal was on the table, and its pages were turning by themselves, stopping at the last entry. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The writing was messy, like Dad had been scared when he wrote it. May 15, 1994. They're calling me again. The lake people. Every night they show me more. their underwater cities, their powers, their plans. They say I'm special, that they chose our family long ago. The cave under the lake holds their temple. That's where the transformation happens. I can feel the change starting. My skin is different now. I see things in the dark. I know Kevin will come looking for me someday. He always was curious, just like me. And Peter, oh my dear son Peter, you'll be the last to join us. The water knows. The water waits. The journal dropped from my hands as something wet touched my neck. I spun around and saw water running up the RV walls, against gravity. It was forming shapes, like letters, but in a language I'd never seen before. My radio crackled to life. "Pete, come, join." It was Kevin's voice, but different, like he was talking underwater. Through the RV window, I saw more shapes rising from the lake. The fog swirled around them, making them look like walking shadows. They were coming toward the RV, the changed campers, led by something that used to be my brother. I grabbed my flashlight and Dad's journal. I had to get out, had to warn someone. But when I opened the RV door, Kevin was there. His skin was gray and shiny, his eyes completely black. "It doesn't hurt, Pete," he said, water pouring from his mouth as he spoke. "The change feels amazing. Dad's waiting for us in the temple. We can be a family again." Behind him, the lake monster rose up, its huge body blocking out what little light was left. The other changed campers surrounded the RV, all staring at me with their black eyes. I had one chance. I remembered something from my ranger training about these old forests having underground caves. If I could just reach the ranger station. But first, I had to get past my brother, or whatever he had become. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my flashlight as hard as possible at the RV's window. The glass shattered with a loud crash. While Kevin and the others turned to look at the noise, I pushed past them and ran. The cold air burned my lungs as I sprinted through the forest. Behind me, I heard splashing and that terrible humming sound. They were following me. Kevin's voice echoed through the trees. "You can't run from the water, Pete. It's everywhere." He was right. The ground under my feet was getting wetter, and black puddles were forming in my path. I jumped over them, remembering how that water had changed the others. Every tree I passed seemed to be dripping with dark liquid. I knew these woods. I'd been a ranger here for years. There was an old cave system about half a mile away. If I could just reach it. Something grabbed my ankle. A tentacle of black water had shot up from a puddle. I fell hard, and Dad's journal flew from my hand. As I scrambled to grab it, I saw Kevin step out from behind a tree. He didn't walk, he kind of glided, leaving a trail of water behind him. "Don't you want to see Dad?" he asked, his voice gurgling. "He's so different now, Pete. So powerful. We all are." The other changed campers emerged from the fog. Their bodies were dripping, melting, reforming. The huge shape from the lake was moving through the trees behind them, its many eyes glowing in the dark. I grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at the water tentacle. It burst like a water balloon and I ran again. The cave entrance was just ahead, a black hole in the hillside. "You'll be alone, Pete." Kevin's voice was getting closer. "Everyone you love is with us now." I reached the cave and dove inside. It was pitch black, but I knew these caves had another exit that led to the ranger station. I pulled out my backup flashlight and saw something that made my blood freeze. There were drawings on the cave walls. Ancient paintings showing people being dragged into a lake by something with tentacles. And below them, carved into the stone, were words written recently. "Sorry, son, the water always wins, Dad." The sound of dripping echoed through the cave. It was coming from every direction. My flashlight beam shook as I moved deeper into the cave. The dripping sounds got louder, and I could hear water flowing somewhere ahead. My radio crackled again, this time with Dad's voice. "Pete, come see what I've become." I wanted to turn it off, but I needed it for emergency calls. The cave walls were getting wetter, shining with that strange black water. My flashlight caught something ahead, a backpack. It was old and moldy, but I recognized the name tag, "Property of John Hamilton." Dad's backpack from his last camping trip. Next to it was a camera, one of those old waterproof ones. With shaking hands, I picked it up. It still worked. The last photo on it made my heart stop. It showed Dad standing in front of an underwater cave entrance, but his face was already changing. Looking at my last photo, Pete? Kevin's voice echoed through the cave. Dad took that right before he joined them, before he became something better. I kept moving, trying to remember the cave map. The ranger station exit should be just around the next bend. But when my flashlight lit up the path ahead, I saw something impossible. A pool of black water blocking the entire passage. The surface of the pool started to move. Something was coming up. First a hand, then a shoulder, then a face I hadn't seen in over a year, Dad. But not really Dad. His skin was like wet paper, his eyes were empty black holes, and his mouth was full of sharp, dark teeth. "Son," he said, water pouring from his lips. "I've waited so long to show you." Behind me, I heard Kevin and the others entering the cave. I was trapped between them and whatever Dad had become. The walls started leaking more black water, and that horrible humming sound filled the cave. Dad reached out his dripping hand. "It's time to join the family, Pete. The real family." My flashlight started to flicker. In the dark between flashes, I saw their true forms, not human at all, but something ancient and horrible. The lake monster's tentacles were squeezing through the cave entrance, and the water was rising around my feet. I had one last chance. There was a small tunnel to my left, too small for them, maybe just big enough for me. But could I really leave them? My dad, my brother. The flashlight died, and in the darkness, I felt cold, wet hands reaching for me. In the total darkness, I made my choice. I dove for the small tunnel, squeezing through just as something cold and wet grabbed at my leg. I kicked hard and crawled forward, scraping my elbows and knees on the rough stone. Behind me, Dad's voice changed into something inhuman. "You can't escape the water, Peter. It's in your blood now." I kept crawling. The tunnel was so tight my chest could barely move to breathe. Water was running down the walls, dripping on my back. Every drop felt like ice, and I swear each one was trying to sink into my skin. "Pete." Kevin's voice came from somewhere in the dark. "Don't you want to know how it feels, to be part of something bigger?" The tunnel started sloping up. My arms were bleeding from the sharp rocks, but I couldn't stop. Their voices were getting closer, and I could hear something larger moving through the cave walls themselves, the lake monster, trying to find another way to reach me. Finally, I saw light ahead, morning sunlight through the ranger station exit. But as I got closer, water started flowing into the tunnel from that direction too. They were trying to trap me. I reached into my pocket and grabbed Dad's journal. Using the last of my strength, I threw it toward the voices behind me. I heard them stop, distracted by it. That gave me just enough time to make the final push toward the exit. I burst out of the tunnel into the morning air. The ranger station was just ahead, up the hill. Behind me, the cave entrance bubbled with black water, and I heard Kevin scream, "You'll be back, Pete. The water will call you too." I ran to the station and grabbed the emergency radio. Through the window, I could see dark shapes moving in the trees, heading back toward the lake. The water was calling them home. That was 3 days ago. I filed reports, but nobody believes me. They found the empty RV and some abandoned camping gear, but the lake looks normal now. They say the other campers probably just went home. They say Kevin probably got lost in the woods. But I know the truth. Sometimes at night, I hear that humming sound. The water from my faucet runs black for a few seconds. And yesterday, I got a text from Kevin's old phone. "The water is patient, little brother. We'll wait for you. We'll always wait for you." I'm leaving town tomorrow, going somewhere far from lakes and rivers. But as I pack my bags, I can't help noticing. My skin feels different today. And when I passed a mirror, just for a second, I thought I saw my eyes turning dark.